Oftentimes we find ourselves getting lost in the fabrications of our own mind. We don't look at ourselves with the judgment of another perspective, but impose our own beliefs and biases onto this image of who we believe ourselves to be. We find ourselves getting lost in this image we've created, believing that the outside world also perceives us like that we're destined to remain in that form for the conceivable future. There are two consequences to this. It can either propel you to create the identity of the person you've always wanted to be, or it can lead you down a path of despondency and despair that you feel like is inescapable, that the walls around you are creeping ever closer to suffocating you within them. Understanding how to traverse through both of these forms of delusion in life, and knowing how to use the former to your benefit, and understanding how to escape from the latter will become one of the defining factors in you reaching where you ultimately want to reach in life. This is where we attempt to answer the topic of this video: how do I see past my own delusion? The first step is understanding the process behind this well-known ancient Greek phrase, Gnothi, Seauton, or more commonly translated as know thyself. How do we truly get to that point where we know thyself? Who are you truly, away from the smear and the stains that the world and society imposes on you? What are your thoughts composed of? What do you believe builds the core entity of your being? You will get a few answers for this when these questions are proposed to you. Start by writing them down. When I did this exercise, the first things I wrote down were hungry for wealth and power, that my thoughts were composed of ways of achieving those goals, that the magnifying glass that I imposed on myself showed that the core entity of my being was filled with a burning desire of material objects. But the true question behind wealth and power being things that were the basis of my thoughts was, how would society perceive me if I had those two things? Nietzsche quotes, "He who despises himself nevertheless esteems himself thereby as a despiser." Doing this practice led me straight to the fact that I esteem myself with vanity, that the answer to what I believe builds the core entity of my being, not being wealth or power, but vanity. If society wasn't a factor, what would I truly be doing? And from that, the answer I received was reading. During that time in my life, I hadn't picked up a book for a good while, despite it being one of my childhood hobbies. From following this process, with many of my thoughts, I started to know thyself, that in the delusion of my own vanity, I became so engrossed with this objective of wealth and power that I forgot what truly was at the core of my existence, someone who just wants to learn. Are you someone who wants to achieve a lot and has big goals, but also someone who is lazy and struggles to get to action? Are you someone who believes they are moral and kind, but are rude to your family and friends, and are only nice to strangers you meet in public? What are some things you believe composes the core entity of your being? And truly assess whether you are those qualities. Could you be lying to yourself? This process may take days for some, weeks for others, perhaps years, but it's important to start it now. Learn to know thyself, and you are one step closer to seeing yourself out of your own delusion. The next method to seeing past our own delusion is a term I'm going to call the Delusion of Despair. We all feel as if we're drowning in a cesspit of our own struggles, that with each day the world becomes just a little bit more tough, that in the morning getting out of bed becomes even more difficult. We feel like there's no escape to our issues, that there is no route out from this shroud of misery. This is the most difficult delusion to deal with, and the most common. This is why I'm going to discuss it first. It's easy to see this propagation that most people are completely clued on to what they're doing in life, but this is the reality of it. Most people aren't. Now, this isn't meant to make you feel better about it, but I also don't want anyone to feel as if they're alone in this struggle. This delusion of despair was the thing in life I struggled with the most. The feeling that no one truly understood what I was going through, that everyone was prospering whilst I let myself fall into an escapist mindset of endless TV shows and video games, trying to exist purely in my own mind through things that didn't even exist. It really struck me when I was playing this video game called Assassin's Creed and thought of how much I'd rather exist in that game, playing as a fictional character, than be out in the real world. Realizing that, I knew that I had reached rock bottom, but the benefit of being at rock bottom is that the only place you can go up from there is up. Now, let's make this actionable. How do we get out of the delusion of despair? Write down the answer to this question. What are some things you find yourself worrying or complaining about on a daily basis? For me, I constantly complained about things not going my way. That if and when I tried something new or pushed myself out of my comfort zone, I just felt like it never worked out. From understanding that as something that bothered me every day, it then led me to question, what was I doing about it? The answer to that is nothing. I was doing nothing to solve the problem that bothered me so much. It was insanity. I kept trying new things and failing, then being miserable about failing, and then repeating that process again and again until I got to the point where I couldn't see a way out of my own misery. This change of perspective made me realize that I have to try a different method to get out of this delusion of despair. I couldn't continue down that rabbit hole, so I continued to question myself even more. Why did I feel like I was failing? What could I do not to fail? It took me a while and a few more repetitions of the same blunderous process, but I came up with two answers. The first being that I wasn't trying hard enough, and the second that I was quitting too quickly. Now I had two objectives. I needed to find ways of trying harder and not quitting as soon as I faced some sort of difficulty. I worked my way up from the depths of misery to finding a small hole to escape from, knowing that I had to create processes to work hard at my goals and find ways of sticking at them when it started to get tough. Ultimately, following this process helped me escape the delusion of despair. This can work in many different scenarios. The one I personally experienced is something that many people go through. Something else which is quite common is the feeling of needing to escape from reality. Follow that same process. Find all the impulses that cause you to want to escape from the world. It could be situations occurring at work or school, an issue with a friend or a family member. Try to understand why that feeling arises in the first place. Then once you have an answer for that, try to think of different methods to solve it. There are so many different philosophies and practices out there in the world. There is no definitive one that works for everyone. There are loads to try and choose from. Something I can suggest is to find something you would love to do and do it. The creation of this video for me is exactly that. It gives me the opportunity to discuss, revise, and practice my own tips and things I've learned from great minds of the past. It forces me to hold myself to my own standards because I'm effectively preaching it to viewers out in the world. It could be an art, a sport, a skill, an instrument, absolutely anything. Try many different things. Society would judge you for being too whimsical or impulsive, but for you to find some sort of fulfillment in reality is going to require you to experiment with many different types of activities out there in the world before you find the one. A quote from Edward Abbey: "Better a cruel truth than a comfortable delusion." The next and the last type of delusion we're going to talk about in this video is the delusion of self. First, what do we mean by the delusion of self? The answer I've coined for this is quite simple. Existing as if you are something without realizing in reality that you're not. For example, believing that you are somebody who is a hard worker, but in actuality you don't do anything productive throughout the day. Or looking in the mirror and believing that you're fit and healthy when in reality you're far from it. These are situations in the delusion of self that is crucial to make sure we're not living in. This ties directly into know thyself. You cannot live life believing that you are perfect in your flaws, and then not doing anything to at least correct those flaws. We cannot go into a room believing that we're the smartest one there without having anything to back that claim. That is just a dogma fashioned by your mind, something that inhibits your call to action. A phrase which is quite common these days is manifestation. Now, without getting into if the spiritual factor is true with it, I've come across many people who believe in the power of manifestation and that everything will fall into their lap with focused belief and meditations on their goals, but they don't actually do anything in reality to achieve anything. We have to escape this belief that we become good at something without actually practicing or honing our skills. The problem is, we confine ourselves to these small worlds where we may be better than the people around us at certain things. We may be the smartest or the strongest and so on, but without opening our eyes and looking out at the rest of the world around us, we'll be stuck in this delusion of self. And the quicker you can escape it, the better. There's always a reckoning for people stuck in this type of delusion. Rarely a person will go through life and remain firm in this. They will come across a situation where the entire belief system shatters, and the more you delay that realization, the more shock you will feel when that realization comes forth. Most people are engrossed in this delusion. They are stuck in the parameters of the walls they build up themselves, too unconscious to realize their own reality. This was me at one point in life. I believed that I deserved recognition for things that I hadn't worked for, that I possessed qualities and attributes that I wasn't even close to an iota of, that with belief in the vain objects that I wanted, it will all eventually fall into my lap. We have to break the shackles of this delusion of self. Nothing is more devastating than realizing you were wrong about everything you believed into your core. That is why it's important to remember this quote from Socrates. The only thing I know is that I know nothing. Be aware of your flaws. Understand that nothing in life is going to come without a process of critical thinking and action behind that thought. Destroy the dogma that your mind has encaptured you in. I have listed 3 ways that I believe will help with the question of how do I see past my own delusions. It's important to recognize that as humans we all have certain delusions that our brains naturally impose upon us, and that everyone around you is going through those exact same dilemmas. That it is necessary to escape from these delusions and actually come to a better understanding of where we sit in life. I hope this video provides you with a greater understanding of some of the delusions I believe exist in our minds and methods to escape them. Hit the like button if you want to see more content like this, and subscribe to join me on this path of continuous learning.